Cameron's from Voice of the Martyrs, and right now, if you go to a very traumatic place called a petrol station, and you know that you've had to get a bank loan or extend a credit card, you'll know that this little isolated place called Australia is impacted by stuff that goes on in other parts of the world as well. We are not isolated. And I just thought this morning it'd be really great to have someone share a perspective of what's going on in the rest of the world that we actually aren't isolated from.
Well, good day. Great to meet you all. My name is Cameron and I represent Voice of the Martyrs in Victoria and Tasmania. Who's heard of Voice of the Martyrs before? Yeah, brilliant. Fair few of us. Maybe you've read Torture for Christ by Richard Wurmbrand. He founded the original ministry that inspired us. We're a ministry that's committed to raising awareness of the persecuted church for the sake of prayer and awareness. So we share the stories. We support Christians overseas practically through financially, but also spiritually by prayer. And we want to include the churches in Australia through share the stories so that we can be praying for and raising awareness of and learning from and supporting the persecuted church. So that's our mission. If you see over there, this is a picture from Nepal. This was not far from the Himalayas. On an earlier trip to Nepal, our team met a woman named Raichana. I'll tell you a bit about Raichana. Raichana was married to a Hindu man in Nepal. It's a very strong Hindu country. They want, a little bit like India, they want to be a pure Hindu country. And Raichana was married to a Hindu man, and there came a time when her mother was unwell. Her mother became quite sick, and they tried everything to heal her. They tried witch doctors, they tried medical doctors, they tried everything. And nothing seemed to really work. And so eventually, Raichana heard that if she took her mum to church, maybe her mum would get healed. Now, this is quite often the case in Nepal where people will go to a church, receive something like healing, and then they'll say, well, I'll leave that Christianity thing behind now because I've got what I wanted and I'm going to go back to Hinduism because it's a lot easier. So anyways, Raichana and her mum and her dad went to church. And they got the greatest news of all. They heard the gospel and they came to know Jesus. Praise God. They also, with time, Raichana's mother was healed. Praise God. Raichana was so excited, and of course she held on to her faith. She wanted to hold on to Jesus, much to the anger of her husband. Chapang tried to get her to turn away from Jesus, but she refused. Eventually, Raichana's two children came to know Jesus. They're now probably about 19 and 21, roughly. And so eventually, Chapang, the husband, got really frustrated, got up, divorced her, went to a different village, and got remarried. That left them in a really financially tough spot. Because of her faith, she was divorced. She was she was mistreated by her husband that way. And, if I ended the story there, we'd say, well, what an amazing story of a woman who stood firm in the faith. And it is. But the story doesn't end there. A little while later, Chapang decided he wanted to get revenge. Came back to the village, middle of the night, dark. Came to the house, got in the house, holding a tank of petrol. Threw the petrol on Raichana, lit her on fire. Horrific. I mean, absolutely horrific. Thank goodness the neighbors heard Raichana. They came to her aid. They took out the fire. Chapang was arrested. He's in prison. If I ended the story there, we'd say, well, what an amazing story of a woman who stood firm in the faith. And it is, but the story doesn't end there. Raichana was later being interviewed by VOM, and the person asking or interviewing her asked this question. He said, Raichana, and I wouldn't have the guts to ask this question. He said, Raichana, have you been able to forgive your husband? I don't know about you, but I would cower out of asking that question. I mean, what an uncomfortable question. But amazingly, Rachana said yes. She goes every week to the prison with food for her husband. Every week. What an amazing story of a woman who stood firm in the faith. And it also points to the gospel. It points to that thing we'll be celebrating next week, the death and resurrection of Jesus. And it points to the grace of God. And this is why we want to share these stories. You know, we don't want to just pull heartstrings here. We really want to show you that living for Jesus is worth it, even when it could cost you everything. If we can go to the next slide, that'd be great. So right now, somewhere in the world, a Christian is suffering for their faith. A couple weeks ago, we heard about a brother named Fat. He's in Vietnam. He was riding his bike with his friend, with a small ministry team. They were stopped by some men in uniform. And, they interrogated him for a minute, then they let him go. But two of the men on one of the bikes stayed behind. As they were driving, these men came up, kicked Brother Fat off the bike. The driver of the bike regained control after a minute, but Brother Fat fell to the ground. The other men, the uniformed men, got off the bike and were beating him up, left him in a ditch. He was in a really bad state, so Tam, the driver, grabbed him, got him on the bike. In Vietnam, you cannot get medical attention if you're a Christian. This is just one of those horrific things. They just will not give you medical attention because of your faith. And so they tried their best to get him to emergency help, but unfortunately, Brother Fat was promoted to glory. This was not 100 years ago, 200 years ago. We might read books like Fox's Book of Martyrs, or we hear stories of people who passed away for their faith, like Jim Elliot or Graham Staines, or maybe you hear the disciples were killed for their faith. But this happened 2-3 weeks ago. This is happening right now. And not to strangers, but to our brothers and sisters in Christ. This is what's happening right now. And so our mission, VOM's mission, is to help us remember the persecuted, to remember those in prison as if chained with them. Those who are in the body also, since we are in the body as well. That's what Hebrews 13:3 talks about. This is our mission. Next slide would be great. This is just a map, as you can see here. Those different colored countries are kind of, the different colors are showing different kind of degrees of persecution. Those red countries are where Christianity is restricted, so you literally cannot be a Christian. The government is full on against you being a Christian. The yellow countries are where Christianity is treated with hostility. So you could be a Christian, but there might be some restrictions on certain aspects of the faith. Like maybe you could be a Christian and go to church. So like in Nepal, you could be a Christian, you can go to church, but you can't convert other people. You can't evangelize. There was a brother named Kashab who was in Nepal, and he was videoed baptizing believers and praying around the beginning of the pandemic. He was praying against the spread of the pandemic. Someone saw that video. Brother Kashab was arrested, and they wrestled with the court or the legal system for years about this. Eventually, Kashab was sentenced to a year in prison. Now, that's a considerably light sentence considering the fact that if you convert and baptize someone, that is 5 years in prison in Nepal. 5 years for bringing someone to Jesus and baptizing them. Next slide, thank you. What is at the heart of persecution? Why does this happen? I mean, it seems very odd to us. For a lot of us, we grew up in Western culture where Christianity was kind of accepted. Stephen McAlpine's a writer. He's in Perth, and he says, in the past 100 years, there's been this shift, right? 100 years ago, you could be the culture embraced church. We said, even if you weren't like a genuine Christian, people went to church on Easter and Christmas, and church had a place in society. Then as time went by, church was kind of treated with apathy. It wasn't kind of favored or not. And then slowly but surely, the church has started facing pressure by our culture. Maybe you felt it. Maybe you see things on the news or on social media, slander against Christianity in churches, and maybe you think, man, it really feels like it's just getting worse. And it is in the West. But this is ancient news in places like North Korea. For the past 100 years, roughly, North Korea has been so anti-Christianity. It used to be the Jerusalem of the East, is what it was called. Pyongyang in North Korea was called the Jerusalem of the East. There was a great revival there. It was incredible. But then Kim Il-sung, maybe you've heard of him, came along and decided he didn't like Christianity. He took some things from Christianity, made his own little personality cult, and now the church is heavily persecuted against North Korea. It's one of the most heavily persecuted or places for persecution in the world. And there's a lot of different reasons for why Christianity is persecuted against. I think people often just don't want to hear the truth. I think that's one of the main things. People just don't want to hear the truth. People don't like it. It's uncomfortable. Christianity is just a little bit uncomfortable. It has some views that are a little bit uncomfortable. And you and I might face slander or the jokes of our mates at work or the hard conversations with that friend who really just doesn't get why we're Christians, and they raise their voice and call us some names, in anger. That is persecution. That's one form of persecution. Jesus does talk about insults and reviling when he talks about persecution. But there's a gradient, there's a scale. There's indifference, there's insults, there's people get restrained, they try to restrict the message, people get detained, they get imprisoned. 2 women in Iran a number of years ago were putting Bibles in people's mailboxes. A little bit like what Lex was talking about by putting those little pamphlets in people's mailboxes. These 2 women just putting Bibles in people's mailboxes. They were put in prison for a number of years, I think it's just over 2 years, in one of the most infamous prisons in the world for putting Bibles in people's mailboxes. Could you imagine? People are being arrested, people are being treated with violence, with torture, and are being killed for their faith all around the world. Next slide would be great, thanks. And this is just some of the ideologies shaping persecution. We probably hear a lot about Islamic oppression. Then you can hear a bit about communism as well. There's 5 countries that still quite strongly hold to communism today. Our founder, Richard Wurmbrand, he was persecuted by a communist government. He was in prison for a total of 14 years for standing up for the faith when the government wanted the church to compromise, to kind of appease communism. And that's still happening today. In China, the TSPM churches, or 3 self-patriotic movement churches, the official churches, want to make sure that the churches align with communism. And there's a number of churches that refuse to do that. And so instead, they're treated as illegal churches. They're called underground churches. There's one in Inner Mongolia. We heard this story, and it was just fantastic. This pastor went to one of the official church pastors, and he says, "Brother, our Bibles are falling apart." Someone said, if your Bible's falling apart, the likelihood is you aren't falling apart. You've heard that? These guys love their Bibles. And he's saying our Bibles are falling apart. We need new Bibles. And the pastor said, I can't help you. I won't help you. You're in a legal church. So he refused to help them. So VOM, one way we were able to help was getting Bibles into people's hands. One of the funny statistics is they print Bibles in China. They send them out. And then we have to smuggle them back into China. I like efficiency. That just seems like way too many steps. And the people that can have Bibles, even though it's very difficult for them to have them, are the people that are willing to compromise with the government. The people who really value the Bible cannot have them legally. This is going on in the world right now. Next slide, thanks. Let's go show this video. This is in Pakistan. Pakistan is another real hotspot for persecution. To be a believer in Pakistan, you have very few options as far as work goes. One of them is working the brick kilns. You know, I'm wearing shoes with like rubber on my feet, right? And the brick kilns, they have these furnaces under the ground. And so if I was walking around for long enough time and I stood maybe for long enough, the bottoms of my shoes would probably melt. That's how hot it is. I'm going to show this video. This is a brother who is making bricks in the brick kiln. Thank you. It's cool. Yeah, that's cool. No worries. So another job that they can have if they wanted to be, if they want a job. Another one is sewage work. Now we have hazmat suits and nice ways to go about that sort of work. Not in Pakistan. They are very limited in job options. They're treated as untouchables, as outcasts. The women are being forced into arranged marriages with Muslim men against their will. It's a horrific situation. A sister there, Esther, she was a very strong, devout Muslim. Her family was very strong, devout Muslims, and she heard the glorious stories of jihad. She herself was signing up to go to jihad, and she came to hear about the gospel, and eventually she got saved. And much to the disapproval of her family, her dad was ready to take her life. But they decided they would bring her before the imams, the kind of religious elites of Islam. And so one after the other, they brought this young woman before the religious elites, and time after time after time, she would answer questions and she would fire back and show just how weak Islam is and how little they actually understood about their own religion. But eventually she had to flee. She and the man that she ended up marrying fled from her family before she was killed, or before they were able to kill her. And it's just amazing what the gospel can do to transform lives like Esther's. And this is what's going on in Pakistan, though. Islam is an incredibly strong force there. We'll go to the next slide. I'll share a bit about Mrs. Han. This is a video, but I'll just share the story. Mrs. Han's in North Korea. She's a North Korean defector. She does missionary kind of work. And when she was growing up in North Korea, her grandfather was a Christian. And she'd watch and she'd see her grandfather praying, and she thought that maybe this is how old people sleep, is kind of what she thought. She'd see him kneeling and praying, and it looked like he was sleeping, and she just didn't really understand. And she'd hear her father kind of mock her grandfather, saying, why would you believe in God? We've made it to the moon. This is back in the 60s, right? They're excited about the fact that they made it to the moon finally. So he's like, why do we need God? We've made it to the moon after all. One day, the authorities came into their house, ransacked the house, looking for something. And she thought, maybe we've got weapons. That's what, kids hearing war stories, she probably thinking, oh, maybe we've got weapons, that sort of thing. No, they were looking for a Bible. This is how they see the Bible. It's a weapon. It's deadly. It's dangerous. And eventually, they grabbed her dad, not even her grandfather who's the Christian, but her dad, dragged him to prison. He spent a little while in the prison. He came out, and he had witnessed Christians, some who broke down and gave up their faith to get out of the situation, but others who were sentenced to death. There are labor camps and where Christians are sent, if they even have a Bible. Not just you, but your family with you will be sent to a labor camp if they find out that you are a Christian. Well, Mrs. H later on got married. Her mother-in-law, a Christian as well, was also praying. And, again, she didn't really quite understand what was going on. Eventually, she decided she was going to leave North Korea. It's a horrific situation there, just financially, not even just as a Christian, but just as a citizen of North Korea. So she was trying to run away, and eventually she was caught. She was put in prison. Her husband passed away in the prison. She tried again to get out. And her faith was very weak at that point, but she knew she had to turn to God. And she saw the way God protected her and her children. Eventually, she came to know more about the Christian faith when she came to South Korea. And she learned more through the university, the VOM University, the underground one. VOM Korea does an amazing work. If you ever want to hear about what they do, it's incredible. They send Bibles over the border with balloons in little SD cards. It's incredible. But Mrs. Han came to know the Lord kind of through that season. And now she helps, she's a missionary herself. This is what the gospel does in the life of a believer like Mrs. Han. We'll go to the next slide, thanks. And you know, stories like these can leave us with two reactions. We can be moved for a minute, or we can decide to stand with them. You know, these stories can pull at the heartstrings. Hearing about Ray Chana and what she went through, or Mrs. Han, or Esther, or, you know, one of the, Brother Fat, you hear these stories and they pull at the heartstrings. And we could be moved for a minute, or we could decide to stand with them. And by standing with them, I simply mean we can remember them and pray for them. This isn't a different church. You know, we're one body with many members. Richard Wurmbrand, who founded the ministry, he used to share about his experiences in prison. 14 years in prison he was in total, and he was tortured. He went through solitary confinement, and he was very badly beaten on his feet, to the point where after a little while of talking like I am now, he'd have to sit in a chair, and he didn't wear shoes. And he says, you know, when my feet were beaten, my mouth cried out. What do you mean by that? Well, I think it's really good imagery to explain what we're here to do. A member of the body is getting beaten, and we're going to cry out on behalf of them. That's what we're here to do. So that we can remember them, learn from their experiences, and pray for them. And even if feel led, support them. But our main reason is to pray for them. We want to stand with them by praying for them. It's our church family. We're one body with many members all around the world, and we want to support them through prayer. Next slide, thanks. As I said before, I'll just mention briefly, this is Richard Wurmbrand. He was the founder of the ministry. Spent 14 years in prison, in solitary confinement. He was beaten. He was mistreated. He should have died. He came through that, all because he stood firm in his faith and spoke out when the government didn't like it. He went to this thing called the Congress of Cults, which was this big event with all the church leaders. They gathered together, and one after the other, the church leaders got up and they spoke out in a way that compromised the gospel and compromised Christianity. And Richard is sitting there and he's seething. He's a Lutheran minister, and he's sitting there and he's just, him and his wife are frustrated. Now his wife, Sabina, said, Richard, get up there and wipe the shame off Christ's face. What she meant is this: get up there and you know, stand up for Jesus in this moment. And Richard just said, you know, you're going to lose a husband. They weren't oblivious to the oppression of the government. Bless Sabina, strong woman she is, she turned and said, I'd rather not have a coward for a husband. Man, I'm not married, but like that still sends shivers up my spine, you know. But you know, Richard gets up there and he speaks out about the faith, and that leads to him being imprisoned. He was walking to church. A little while later, he escaped from that gathering, but later on was walking to church. Car pulls up, men get out, grab him, put a bag over his head, pull him in the car, drive off. He spent a total of 14 years. Beaten, tortured, in solitary confinement. And he stood firm in his faith, and he wanted to then share about the experiences and share about the situation that's happening in the world with persecuted churches. That was his mission. And so he spent the rest of his life, when he got out and when he left Romania with his wife, he spent the rest of his life sharing about the persecuted church and supporting them. That was his mission. Next slide, thanks. So this is our mission. We want to hear about the persecuted church. We're connected to and aware of the persecuted church, what's going on. We hear their stories. We want to get the stories here to Australia so that we can then pray for and raise awareness of the persecuted church. That's our mission. Next slide, thanks. So you can stand with them. I highly recommend signing up to the magazine. So we have a magazine. It comes out once a month. It's free, either in the post or in the email. And it just shares stories of the persecuted church. And usually it's themed around a country, and it shares 3 stories typically. Gives you a bit of an idea of what's going on in the country and specific examples of what's going on so that we can be praying. And you can also receive our weekly newsletter. We have kind of a weekly news update on what's going on in the persecuted church. So that story about Brother Fat I shared, that was from 2 weeks ago in the newsletter. Just this last week, we had 2 stories from Pakistan. One about a young woman, 18 years old. She's a Christian from a Christian home. Muslim man was harassing her, eventually forced her to marry him. Just recently, we've been able to get her, or she's been able to get out of that situation with the child. They've been able to get a divorce. She was getting abused and beaten. A horrific situation. These stories we put out every week so that we know what's going on and we can be praying for and raising awareness of the persecuted church. So that's why we have these resources. And look, if you'd like to sign up, we'd love to then give you a book. We have books. Who likes reading? There's a few of us out there. Great. I love reading. And we've got books that we'd love to give to you as a way of saying thank you for signing up for free. All right, next slide. Thank you. You can keep standing with them too. We've got social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. We post pretty regularly on Facebook and Instagram for sure. We've also got an app that's got the podcast. We've got a podcast called The Frontline Report. It's typically broadcasting the VOM America's interviews with people from the front line. Really encouraging stuff. There was a story about a brother, Pastor Paul in India. He was put in prison, and his story is just incredible. I'll let you list the story and find out, but it's a great, great story. And there's also other resources on the app, including a daily prayer reminder for the persecuted, as well as 2 of our films that share a bit about Richard Wurmbrand, and an audio version of Torture for Christ. If you don't like reading, I totally get it. There's an audio version of Torture for Christ. Please listen to it. It will have a real impact. Next slide, thanks. Just very quickly, next slide, thank you. Awesome. Just very quickly, these are the 5 main ways we support the persecuted church. So through frontline ministry, so supporting those who are sharing the gospel on the front lines. Families of martyrs, those who have families who have been affected by persecution. We support the persecuted through providing Bibles and literature, through providing medical attention. And then the 5th one there is just supporting domestic costs so that we can be a voice for the persecuted. Next slide, thanks. So thank you for listening. I'll just remind again, Hebrews 13:3, remember the prisoners as if chained with them, those who are in the body, since you yourselves are in the body also. We exist to help us all remember the persecuted and pray for them. That's why we're here. I'd love to connect with you afterwards and share a bit more. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.